many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. We will be diving into politics today, and we will be diving into the economy. But one thing I did want to start off the show with is something that we've kind of neglected here for a little while, and that's, well, foreign news, foreign policy, and with everything we have going on with the election, the so much uncertainty out there in the state of the economy and everything, we kind of start to forget about what's going on outside of America, even though what's going on outside of America is really actually affecting us. Definitely, with this whole what it seems to be like a Cold War between the Western, how should we say, alliance and Russia and China and everything going on there. Well, I have one here. I found it a few different places, but it's originally out of AP. NATO troops in massive airborne exercise in Poland. 19 NATO member nations and 5 partner nations are contributing troops to the exercise. About 2,000 NATO troops from the U.S., Britain, Portugal, Poland conducted an airborne training operation on Tuesday as part of the biggest exercise performed in Poland since 1989, end of communism, and amid concerns over Russia. Scores of U.S. troops and then military vehicles parachuted into a spacious, grassy training area on the outskirts of the central city of Turin. The force's mission was to secure a bridge on the Vistula River as part of the Polish-led Anaconda 16 exercise that involves about 31,000 troops and runs through mid-June. 19 NATO member nations and 5 partner nations are contributing troops to the exercise that will train and test their swift joint reaction to threats on land, sea, and in the air. In a complex operation that was precisely planned and timed, troops of the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division flew directly from their U.S. base in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Their Boeing C-17 Globemaster transport aircraft were refueled in midair. The British troops flew from a NATO base in Ramstein, Germany, while the Poles arrived from their base in Krakow in southern Poland. The coalition's head of the exercise, U.S. Lieutenant General Benjamin Hodges, said the exercise represented the commitment of the participating countries to stability and security in Europe. And of course, there's more to that article, but you can also find that article. It's at a lot of different places, but it's kind of hidden. But InfoWars has it under their World at War, so it was a little bit easier to find there. But it's provocative action too if you really look at what they're doing. It's not only a training exercise, it's a provocative action by doing it in Poland, and really we probably shouldn't be participating in things that are going to destabilize us even more or destabilize the world anymore. We will see our media always, painting Putin as bad, but Putin's not on the Mexican border or the Canadian border training and doing these exercises with all these communist countries right on our border. So you have to go, maybe we are putting ourselves where we're not invited a lot more often than some of these other countries. Not saying that they're, some great leadership or, great people, but are they doing what we're doing? It's one of those things. Yeah, they might not be the greatest people that you want in charge of these other countries, but that doesn't mean you go out there and be twice as bad and somehow that's justified. I do want to get to a Ron Paul Liberty report talking about this. Playing with fire, NATO launches massive war game in Russia's backyard. And he has some pretty good critiques of what's going on here. And we'll go ahead and do this. Ron Paul Liberty report. Playing with fire, NATO launches massive war game in Russia's backyard.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Very good. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about an item called Anaconda 2016. That sounds like interesting stuff, but it has to do with war games. And war games going on now. Already started, significant number of foreign personnel going to Poland. And it's more or less the confrontation and the pretense of what it's like to be at war with Russia. And I think, actually, I give them credit. I don't think the two sides right now are planning an invasion, but there's a lot of rhetoric going on and a lot of danger exposed. But they've talked about war games for a long time, and what comes to my mind is playing games with American security, because they're talking about building up troops. What if Russia does this? And what if war breaks out? What can we do? Well, there's been reports that since 2014, they have had 16 examples of war games with NATO and being involved. And strange as it may seem, the side that came out on top was NATO. That's good. So NATO's our friend, and they're going to take care of us, and they're not going to expose us unnecessarily to a war we don't need, and they won't drain our natural resources and our money or run up debt. So we say, okay, they've been winning. But now there's projections about Anaconda 2016, and there's some projections. Well, we always win. NATO always wins, so I guess NATO will win. But then there's this little organization from California, I believe, called the RAND Corporation that analyzes things like this, and they're rather respected on their analysis. And they said, don't get too cocky. They didn't use those words. Don't be too cocky, because what they're saying is Russia will win these war games, and they describe a little bit of the military operation that's involved. And I know you have looked into this and have a pretty good idea of how these people think and what they're really up to, and whether or not you think there's any danger in what they're doing.
You know, it's interesting. You got to wonder who comes up with the names of these operations, because, you know, what is an anaconda? It's an enormous snake that squeezes its prey until it's dead and then devours it. You know, the imagery there is unmistakable. Yet General Ben Hodges, who's the commander of U.S. Army in Europe, he said, quote, "There's no reason to be nervous. This is strictly a defensive exercise." But with such a provocative name, but the operation, it'll be a 10-day military exercise, as you said, involving 31,000 troops, thousands of military vehicles from 24 countries, the largest war games in Europe since the end of the Cold War, and the largest gathering of foreign military troops in Poland since World War II, when it was full of Nazis and Soviets, etc. So the largest foreign troops in Poland since World War II. But don't be nervous.
Yeah, that's right. Everything will be all right. But there's another event shortly after this one finishes, and there's a NATO summit, 8th and 9th of July, in Warsaw, of all places. And these are shows of strength, and it's to warn Russia, don't mess around, we're ready for you. And also, one of the diplomatic explanations of why we do this is we have this moral obligation to reassure our allies that we'll be there for them, we'll cover them. And of course, that means that no matter what happens in Poland, we're going to be involved. Militarily, financially, our troops will be involved. And my moral concern with this, and I've spoken about this before, is by what right has a previous generation had to set this stage for our generation to pay for this and send our kids over there, and nobody questions it. It's like the war has been declared. All they have to do is step over the line, and we have the authority. You know, they're not going to come to Congress and reassess it because we belong to NATO, and we have to. And NATO is the law of the land, so we'd have to do what NATO tells us, just as what the United Nations tells us. So I don't like the process one bit.
Well, it does create a great moral hazard, because Poland has been acting very provocatively toward Russia, especially with this new government, which is a very right-wing government, very nationalistic government. They've been acting very provocatively toward Russia, and it's because they presume that they have the strength of NATO, i.e. the United States, behind them. So it affects their behavior, where they would be more confrontational rather than more cooperative with Russia. But, you know, this is really only one of many, many operations that NATO is involved in in Eastern Europe. As a matter of fact, as we speak, there's also another one in Lithuania called Operation Iron Wolf. You know, it sounds so scary. And that one will have 5,000 NATO troops taking part in Lithuania, which is on Russia's border. And also there's other news that the U.S., ahead of the summit you mentioned, is boosting its military presence in the Mediterranean, its naval presence. But we have actually a chart that I hope we can bring up, because this will give you an example of how many NATO exercises just in the remainder of 2016 will take place in Russia's backyard. And we'll bring it up here in a second. But this is a 5-page listing of all the different NATO operations in Russia's backyard: Estonia, Slovakia, Hungary, Poland, Lithuania, et cetera, et cetera. So this is nothing to be worried about, purely defensive.
And they will tell you that they're not tomorrow being offensive. And some of them believe it. Some of them are convinced of it. And there are some people even in here that they're not predicting that something's going to go badly. But it could be that something goes awry that they don't know about. You know, there are accidents, there are false flags, and all kinds of things. But I also noted that in Romania, we have put missiles in Romania as well. I mean, it isn't like it's just one little place. In all of Eastern Europe, you know, this has been a controversy. I'm just shocked that they automatically accept us, even though sometimes the people vote against it, but the governments seem to want this, and they want these weapons. The other thing that they acknowledged in discussing this is that, no, this probably isn't real war and this sort of thing. And it may be that there's profit motives for this. And that list that you put up there, that costs a little bit of money. And, if you run out of weapons, you have to have more weapons, and you have to demonstrate you have the most modern weapons. And that's why all the candidates right now, we have to rebuild. Rebuild is like it's been torn down, but rebuild to them is continue the building up of our military arsenal so that nobody will attack us. But guess what? We've been under threat of attack more since we've been expressing our aggressive nature overseas. That's what we should be worried about. And this has to be close to being perceived as an aggressive action. I mean, how did we react when Khrushchev went into Cuba? We consider this a rather serious problem. So here we are right up on the border. And the American people seem to be going along with it because all the politicians agree with it. But what would the American people say that because Venezuela is a mess, socialism didn't work, maybe the form of socialism that the Russians have, well, maybe they'll go down there, and I'm not predicting this, they'll go down there and bail out Venezuela and put some military bases there. I mean, that would never be acceptable. But here we're over there, all of Eastern Europe, and right on the borders, and just throwing our weight around, looking for a problem, I think.
And the U.S. For fiscal year 2017 is quadrupling the amount of money it's spending on U.S. military presence in Eastern Europe, up to $3.4 billion in next year's budget for the U.S. military to be up on Russia's borders. So as you pointed out, when the Soviets put a couple of missiles in Cuba, we were ready to start World War III. Yet when we have all of these exercises, quadrupling our spending, and also housing permanent troops there for the first time, when that happens, there's nothing to be worried about.
Well, there's a little bit of a debate going on if you just read what's on the internet. One is that since the Cold War was over, the Polish people didn't hesitate, or the Polish government didn't hesitate to spend a lot of money on their military, and they put a lot of money in there. And yet right now, one of the reasons they're arguing that we need to be prepared is their military is not quite strong enough. So who knows? They could have spent a lot of money. I don't know all the details. They could have had a powerful military, but since they don't have a wise foreign policy, all of a sudden they could be weak in that nature, and their hands are open. If NATO wants to help us, Germany can help us and send some money, but they're really saying, United States, you're the guys that have the weapons, and of course, we'll charge them, but we'll loan them the money, and it'll be paid for by the American taxpayer, and then we're exposed to all the dangers that can come from it.
One of the things the Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter said before Congress recently, which will definitely be emphasized at the Warsaw NATO conference, is pushing these countries, cajoling them, threatening them to spend 2% of their GDP on the military. That's the goal that they should have. And of course, I think we're at probably double that on our military spending, but they refuse to even spend that little bit, and so we're going to push them and prod them into doing this. They're obviously not that afraid.
It isn't that they're going to all of a sudden have manufacturing of weapons over there. Those orders are going to come back here. And of course, since our dollar seems to be resilient, at times it looks weaker, but it's resilient. So even if they don't have the money, we can loan them the money. The orders come back here. Did you know that sometimes it really surprised me when I first discovered this, that we will appropriate money in the area of foreign aid and military aid. The money never leaves the country. We give them a couple $1 billion, and all of a sudden that money ends up in the coffers of corporations. And so it doesn't go over, and the people have a choice on how to use this, or even their politicians vote on it. It goes with a contingency that they buy certain weapons, and if it goes through their country, it's pretty fast. It's a computer entry, but it ends up in the pockets of the 1% here who tend to do quite well under the circumstances that we're suffering from today.
And that goes back, you're right, to the military-industrial complex back here. That drives policy. That's what's kept NATO alive when it should have been put in the grave, 20 years ago. And I had a statistic that I mentioned on a radio program the other day, which I think you will maybe not be shocked. But the Beltway military-industrial complex, for every $1 they spend lobbying, giving to political action committees, to think tanks in Washington, for every $1 they spent, they receive $1,700 in public funds being spent on their projects.
That's the art of the deal. Make a good deal. That's a good deal, isn't it?
I'd invest in that.
Boy, I'll tell you. But unfortunately, it gets paid for by people who are the victims. And that is more taxation, more borrowing, more printing of money, weaker economy, loss of jobs. At the same time, this money flows, and it's more worthwhile for companies like that and other companies, not just the war profiteers. Other companies see this as a necessary investment, to do business. They have to invest the money, and this, of course, is the reason the country gets poorer. Because they're not making an economic decision of what interest rates should be and what the economic growth will be, because all the numbers are fudged, and just like they lie to us when wars break out and when civil liberties are being violated, they lie to us on economic statistics, and they think, oh, well, this will work out if we just spend more of this money, and that's where I think the great problem is, and why the foreign policy is as important, if not more important, than all excessive spending by government. And to me, I have a broad definition of excessive spending, that which is not clearly authorized by the Constitution. That is excessive.
Yeah, I think that would, is our biggest goal at the Institute for Peace and Prosperity, is to convince people, to let them know they are being ripped off. This is a ripoff. They're being robbed and lied to. But, you point out something, if you don't mind going back to something you said earlier that struck me. You mentioned the RAND Corporation, very well respected, founded by the Pentagon back in the 50s, I think it was. They pointed out that, NATO doesn't always win when they project these kinds of attacks. And I think there's something interesting, too, that I think Russia, which, had about a 6-month operation in Syria, where they several times shocked the experts in Washington. They launched the missile from the Caspian Sea, I believe, and did a precision strike into Syria. And nobody knew they had that capability. I think they have unveiled new weapons, new tactics, new systems in Syria. And I'm speculating, but I think it is to send a message to Washington that, listen, you shouldn't push us around. We're not the same army we were in the 90s when Yeltsin was drunk. Everyone was robbing and ripping things off. So it would be nice if Washington would take that message.
Well, good luck on that. We'll keep promoting it, though. And, I mentioned before that I thought this was, it's interesting they call it war games, but I say it's playing games with our national security. But in a way, they're playing with fire. With our national security, and people say, how can this be true that we're playing with fire and playing a game? Of course, that's to make it sound very benign, and yet it's so serious economically and on foreign policy. And most people say, how can this hurt our foreign policy to be strong and have weapons and not get pushed around and not let those Russians intimidate us and push us around? But one thing that we should always remember is who has gone the furthest to have a little squabble with another country. The peoples on whose borders that we fight and argue, or should we consider the people who are the country that goes 6,000 or 8,000 miles away from home? So I think it's playing with fire. It's no silly little game, because economically it's a clear, serious war against the American people and the prosperity of this country. But of course, I see it as a great danger, because I've talked about blowback and the consequences of a ill-advised foreign policy. And if you don't change the foreign policy, this is just going to deteriorate. We will eventually not be able to defend ourselves. And we don't win all the military fights now. If we did, there would be peace in Libya. There'd be peace in Afghanistan. There'd be peace in Libya. There'd be peace in Syria. But there is no peace. And now we want to confront and make sure the Chinese do exactly as we tell them. So, yes, we're playing with fire. And I would say the only option that we have that makes any sense is back off. Take the advice of the founders. Stay out of the entangling alliances. Have a strong national defense and set an example for the world. Have a strong economy. Protect our civil liberties instead of lecturing everybody else about their infraction. That, to me, is a much better approach than the one that we are following. Too bad I don't hear enough of this discussion in the presidential race, but you will only hear it when the American people demand to hear this message. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube and RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Check them out, subscribe. I want to get to this article. And this was actually about Rand Paul, Ron Paul's son. And this is in Reason.com's Hit and Run blog. This one's Rand Paul wants to end the draft and force Congress to vote on authorizing war. So Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky, the erstwhile most interesting man in politics, has laid fairly low since being one of the first high-profile candidates to drop out of the presidential race in February. But in the past few weeks, he has made his presence known on two issues near the hearts, to the hearts of libertarians: ending selective service, aka the draft, and forcing Congress to resume its duty and actually vote on the use of military force. Paul had previously introduced an amendment into the National Defense Authorization Act, which would effectively end selective service, but he has rebranded his efforts in the wake of Muhammad Ali's death in the form of standalone legislation, which he has dubbed the Muhammad Ali Voluntary Service Act. According to the Washington Post, Paul told reporters this past Monday, "I agree with Muhammad Ali. If the war is worth fighting, people will volunteer. When we were attacked on 9/11 and when we were attacked at Pearl Harbor, they almost had to slow it down. There were so many people coming in." In addition, CN2 quotes Paul as saying, "You know, the criminal justice system, I say now, has a racial justice disparity. Selective service had a racial disparity because a lot of rich white kids either got a deferment or went to college or got out of the draft. I'm opposed to selective service. The penalty for avoiding selective service is imprisonment for up to 5 years and or a fine of not more than $250,000. Also this week, Paul revisited his intention to force his colleagues in Congress to do one of their most important jobs, one which they have simply refused to do for years, and vote on a new authorization of use of military force to replace the ones voted on in 2001 and 2003, which are still being used to justify military actions in a number of countries we are not at war with. And like Ron Paul was stating, you know, we go, oh, well, it's NATO. We're allowed to, you know, use our military for war type, you know, war games, and then the actions, they don't call it war, but they go, oh, you know, we do military actions or whatever, involving, you know, NATO. So, well, we're allowed to do it then. We don't have to declare war because we're doing it through NATO. No, that's not how it's supposed to be. It says here, at a ceremony honoring World War II veterans and commemorating the anniversary of D-Day, the Courier Journal reports Paul as saying that everyone knew the war against the Axis powers would end. But with regards to what used to be known as the Global War on Terror, there is no nation state to defeat and no definition of victory. Paul reportedly said this is a war that will never end. How long will there be radical Islam and people will attack us through terrorism? 100 or 1,000 years? I have no idea. It could go on a long time. That's why it has to be limited and narrow, he added. It's always important to put a name and face to war, Paul said. There is too much eagerness for war. There needs to be more of an argument in the opposite direction that it should be a last resort. Seemingly taking aim at the hawks in his own party, as well as President Obama, who has been at war for his entire presidency. Breitbart News quotes Paul as saying, I think there is a certain amount of weakness that invites war, and I would say it in many ways. Obama hasn't definitively had a foreign policy that gives direction or purpose, and so it seems to list one way or another. And I think that actually weakness causes more war sometimes. Paul used the intervention in Libya, which Obama has called the worst mistake of his presidency, but which Hillary Clinton still refers to as smart power, as an example of why Congress must consider and take ownership of military interventions, per Breitbart News. I think the first thing we should do is that Congress should vote on whether we should be there or not. There should be more, or should be an authorization from Congress. The second thing, though, is we need to be aware of the unintended consequences of intervention. I think our intervention in Libya backfired and has made it less safe in Libya, has given ISIS a foothold in Libya. So, go check that article out. And that's at reason.com in the Hit and Run blog. And that's Rand Paul.
Rand Paul has had a busy couple of months.
Sorry. Clips are playing there. I'm not going to play that either. It's 15 minutes, so. But, again, that was reason.com Hit and Run blog. Go check it out. I'm trying to pull up this other article, but it's not one to load. Too many ads popping up on this one. Okay. Now, I want to read this one. This one from the antimedia.org. Anti-media. And this one's Ron Paul, we do not really have a democracy in America. 2016 is a distraction. Says former Congressman Ron Paul has long been an unabashed critic of American foreign policy, central banking, and corporatism. This election season, the former presidential nominee has constantly, candidly expressed his views on the presidential race, often issuing scathing indictments of the two-party system and the authoritarian tendencies of the candidates in the running. On Monday, Ron Paul appeared on MSNBC's Morning Joe to discuss the presidential options Americans are left with, arguing the current campaign quibbles serve as distractions from deeper, more systematic problems. Morning Joe news anchor Micah Brzezinski highlighted disappointments, the contentious Libertarian Party nomination of former New Mexico Gary Johnson, who has been criticized not only for lacking a philosophical understanding of libertarianism, but also for selecting an arguably neoconservative former Massachusetts governor and Council on Foreign Relations member William Weld as his running mate. I know you don't feel these candidates who are in Gary Johnson, Bill Weld, they're really more than a shrug. Is there any possibility for anyone else at this point? The anchor asked Paul, sparking a characteristically uncensored response. Not really, Paul responded. I think the people are left with very poor choices and no real contest. He said he is looking for a second party because, as he said, I see the Republicans and Democrats and all they do is fight and scream at each other, but the policies never change. The size and scope of the executive branch, which is a big concern for me, keeps growing no matter which candidate. And quite frankly, whether it's Hillary or Trump, I think they believe in a strong executive, and that's the opposite of libertarianism. But the libertarian principle of non-aggression, that is where government can't use force to mold society or the economy or tell people how to live around the world. I would say that's a great principle. I'm not really enthralled with the candidates, but that principle is really worthwhile and the opposite of what we've been living with and the opposite of the ideas that have been brought to us to this point where we are now. Paul also highlighted the inanity of the American government's tendency to meddle in other countries' affairs in the name of democracy. We send hundreds of thousands of people and spread trillions of dollars going overseas and saying, we're going to throw out your dictator and we're going to force you to have democracy and elections. And they have elections and we throw them out because they're not our guy. Against the analysis, he offered an examination of the state of democracy at home. In this country, we do not really have a democracy, he said. We continue discussing the way the establishment crushes alternatives to the two-party system. I mean, even if we really super happy with the libertarian candidate, do you think they'd get in the debates? No, the debates are run by the Republicans and Democrats. They find a way to exclude them, so that's not going to happen, he said. Ron Paul was famously ignored by moderates during the 2012 Republican debates, to the extent Saturday Night Live even depicted the bias in a sketch. On his Monday Morning Joe appearance, Paul continued to speak candidly on the core problems of the United States that will continue after 2016 elections. Speaking on the unavoidable similarities between Clinton and Trump, he said, but no overall foreign policy won't change with either party in a significant manner. Spending is going to continue. Government intervention and the Federal Reserve is going to keep manipulating interest rates and never facing up to the fact that this country has lived way beyond its means and the debt is incomprehensible, and we all know it's going to grow and grow. He concluded, I think the personal fighting, is a distraction from the real issue, which is personal liberty and the bankruptcy of this country and the failure of our foreign policy. That's where the problem is. And especially on foreign policy, we don't have anyone that is close on foreign policy. Clinton, Trump, even Bernie, if you want to include Bernie. They will all be puppets to the military-industrial complex. And I think there is somewhat of a shadow government within there that would also play into that. Again, that was from the antimedia.org. Go check them out. Ron Paul, No Democracy in America. Okay, sorry. Give me a second here. Okay. But with these foreign policies that we have, it's also been used here at home, but kind of against us. When you look at, well, we have outside threats, this terrorism. And of course, Rand Paul, points out that, well, we're going to always have that, is that really ever going to disappear? We're not fighting a faced enemy, we're fighting ideology. Which people kind of grow into a ideology, and when we're over there killing innocent people that, when the children are growing up seeing, uncles, sisters, mom, dad, brother, cousins, the neighbor, when they start seeing these people dying and knowing these people to be, well, these were always good people. They didn't do bad things. And then you start looking at that and you go, well, who's in the right? So their reality becomes construed to go, well, then maybe I should join with these guys over here. Well, those guys are no better. But it's like what, Ron Paul's talked about is blowback, and that's one of the blowback consequences from a lot of this. And definitely when we don't have we're not going after a country or a leader, we're going after ideology. So when do we win? When does the war end? At home, they pass Patriot Act and stuff. And I have an article here. This was from bizpackreview.com. Judge Napolitano begs Americans to wake up over new law Congress is considering. It says here Americans have lost many of their liberties over the past several decades, particularly since 9/11, but it appears that lawmakers from both parties are indeed willing to cede what could very well be the most significant chunk of liberty in American history for modicum of security. This week, Congress is considering legislation that would allow the FBI uninhibited access to anyone's internet activity without a warrant. Appearing on Fox News, Shepard Smith reporting on Tuesday, Fox News judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano talked about this continuation of what he considers a decades-old assault on the Fourth Amendment. The whole purpose of the Fourth Amendment was to prevent this sort of fishing net operation where they just throw out a net out there and see what comes in, said Napolitano. it was to force the government to focus on bad people, on people as to whom there is a suspicion. That is why the Fourth Amendment requires probable cause. If the bill is passed, the internet service providers will be banned from telling their subscribers that the FBI has come calling. In fact, doing so will become a criminal felony. The judge rightly considers this an extreme violation of both the Fourth and First Amendments because it also prohibits speech. Host Shepard Smith remarked that surely this bill won't pass since it is so obviously unconstitutional, to which Andrew Napolitano responded, this law will pass because Congress don't give a damn about what is constitutional. According to the judge, the American people should wake up. This is a major step toward a police state. Speaking to the underlying reason, FBI Director James Corney has given for supporting the legislation that constitutional requirements can encumber investigations and make the FBI's work difficult. Napolitano said, guess what? The Constitution is potentially a pain in the neck so that the law enforcement will not run roughshod over our civil liberties. No matter which party controls Congress and the White House, our leaders always seem to be willing to trade a lot of liberty for smattering of false security. At the end of this segment, the judge asked the question all Americans should be asking: if so many weren't asleep to the gradual decline of our freedoms, this is a major step toward a police state. Who or what will keep our liberties safe? And they also have the clip there from that report. So you can go check it out. Now, when we look at all of the liberties we've lost just since 9/11, it's really been kind of a resemblance of many different graphs I've been looking at. You know, I talked about in the last broadcast about the graphs where it was showing, you know, the federal spending and debt, showed student loans, income, participation rate in the workforce, and when you also look at graphs that show loss of, you know, civil liberties, and that graph kind of correlates with the rest of it, the economy, even our foreign policy. The more and more, at least we can say, out in the open meddling in other countries' affairs, all of this, all the graphs look exactly the same, and it really points to authoritarian move. And a lot of people believe that's a move in socialism here in America, and to do so, they have to be able to collapse the system. I think it goes far beyond that. I think it comes more to an authoritarian move towards a more centralized control, which I think that is proven in the more and more that we are engaged using NATO and all these provocative moves and threats and all of this going on with other powers that maybe would have been called Axis powers in the past. I wanted to play this one from Christopher Green out of AMTV, Structural Collapse in Employment and Engineered Socialism. And I've kind of talked about this just a couple times, but it really, we have a move in a authoritarian direction, but I think it goes more beyond just here in America. I think it goes global. And I think we're seeing that with the EU and all that. And, you know, they're not doing too well over there, trying to hold that together. But let's go ahead and cue this up.
Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama want your guns. So protect your guns with the safeandvaultstore.com. Click the link below right now. Memorial Day sale. No tax, plus 10% off, plus free shipping on select handgun and rifle safes with coupon code MEMORIAL. Again, that's 10% off with coupon code MEMORIAL. Give them a call right now at 1-800-207-2259. That's 1-800-207-2259. That's the safeandvaultstore.com. Offer expires June 6, 2016. Hey, everybody. I'm Christopher Green, and you're tuning into AMTV, Alternative Media Television. It is Monday, June 6, 2016. Apologize, the hoarse voice. I think I'm suffering from a cold or something. And the pollution, we get a lot of it from California. The air quality is really bad. You know, I had a rejuvenating weekend, kind of a spiritual week, and I actually attended a seminar with a fellow YouTuber that I'd never heard of before. She talks a lot about energy, law of attraction. Her name is Teal Swan.
Hello there. I'm Teal Swan. I'm known around the world as the spiritual catalyst.
And really loved it, really enjoyed it. It was recommended to me by a friend and met some great people while I was there, and really just kind of opened up my spirit and thinking about new possibilities, even with my own platform and my own life, you know, kind of the health, wealth, happiness, love, as we kind of break it up into all these buckets. And, you know, what do we really want out of our existence, our life? And one thing that she touched on, which really resonated with me, and again, I believe the universe is about energy. I believe in the law of attraction, of manifestation, because I've seen it manifest, many things manifest in my life personally and in the business world, and specifically, in particular, with AMTV. One of the things she touched upon, which was fascinating, is one of the similar topics I've touched upon in thousands of videos, countless videos here on YouTube, and of course broadcasted on amtvmedia.com. And that is the eradication of the middle class, how there's a structural shift in employment with the advent of robotics, new technology, the internet, artificial intelligence, etc., that there's a dramatic wealth redistribution taking place right now, and it's been planned. It's just like I talk about the financial collapse, an engineered financial event. Just like Matt Damon said, and this guy supports Hillary Clinton, which I kind of find phenomenal in its own right, that basically it was the greatest heist that we've ever seen, and everybody knows it. And there's no repercussions. Nobody's paying for it. We're even seeing the advent of, not just here in America, planned socialism. That was the Obama Manchurian candidate agenda. Even over the weekend, I was reading in Switzerland, a very wealthy country with unemployment below 4%, considering a mandatory income. They actually voted on this, a mandatory income for all citizens. They voted it down, 80% nay to yay. But just the sheer fact that they're considering this for a reason. Because of this dramatic, engineered, pre-planned New World Order agenda of massive wealth distribution, where there's truly 5 tech giants, which are total and utter monopolies right now, because they don't need human beings as inputs, you know, kind of like the Matrix, the battery cell. Because they don't need you, they're going to socialize things. They're either going to get rid of you, kill you is one option, just completely eradicate you from the face of the planet, or they're going to socialize things, or do both, which is what is happening now, and give things out like a mandatory income to the slaves, to the peasants. While these internet pioneers, whether or not it's, you know, fascinating minds like Peter Thiel, the PayPal mafia, or it's Elon Musk of SpaceX and Solar City and Tesla, or it's Jeff Bezos of Amazon, or it's Sergey Brin or Larry Page of Google, or it's Uber or Lyft or any of these companies, there's only a handful of them. They control all the wealth, all the power, and all the money, even all the cash, in this run-on cash situation that I've talked about in a few of the past videos regarding economics. These top 5 companies, the top 5 companies, own a third, one of 3 of all the cash assets, and a third of all the cash assets are held overseas of that third, which they don't have to pay taxes on. They don't have to redistribute back here to experience what us little people pay in, federal and state income taxes, for example. So there's this massive shift. And she hit the nail on the head. It's resonated with me because it's something I talk about, that if you're counting on that typical middle class lifestyle that, I'm going to go to college, get a degree, and, I'm going to get the 9 to 5, that's done. It's finished. If you have an energy attachment to that idea of your life, let me just be frank with you, you're screwed. You might die as a result. I'm not being dramatic. It's the absolute truth. What we have in our society now is an extreme lower rung, an extreme lower class, where they've got the fiction being propelled that things are okay through easy credit, 0% interest rates, lending, the scam that makes up the Federal Reserve, printing money out of thin air. So people still think if they can, get a loan for a nice car, a loan for a nice house, or a loan for a nice handbag through credit, that they're, a part of a middle-class society, when really they're here. Again, all the wealth distribution is at the very, very tippy top of this pyramid. And the pyramid now is in reverse with all these social programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all of these programs, pensioners, like what we've seen with Detroit, the book. I encourage you to download. We've only got a couple copies left because they've been flying off the shelves ever since I started talking about it several videos ago. Click that link below. There might be a few left. So we have this dramatic, epic shift in our humanity, and with it comes massive disruption, chaos in a lot of regard. And what that means, let's look at it from a positive perspective, is that you need to take the bull by the horns. You need to understand that nobody's going to take care of you, that the government can't be trusted, will not take care of you, that these social programs cannot be depended on, that your pension may in fact be eradicated, like we've seen here in parts of the states in the good old USA and abroad, in places like Europe. Low interest rates, negative interest rates, they're here to stay. This is the Ponzi scheme. As the tech class, these tech elites that are merging with the machines, these transhumanists like Ray Kurzweil that have 3 blood transfusions a week and truly believe that they will live forever, merge themselves and become, in their own minds, this is what they're actually propelling forward, an entirely new species. I'm not kidding you. This is what they believe. You got Cro-Magnon man and kind of the chimp as we became human as today. Now they're merging with big tech. Some of them, I honest to God, believe are already merging with that big tech. And we see that with our society. We see that with automation, with robots, with kiosks in the service industry, with companies like Lyft and all these apps that completely cut out the middleman and cut out traditional jobs. Again, for every job that's created by technology, 1,000, if not arguably more, are destroyed. So the question is, how do you position yourself in this new world? Well, I think it's by thinking outside of the box. It's by going against the grain. While the herd is going this way, you want to go this way. Let me give you an example. Peter Thiel gave a good one. He said that before he had started PayPal and gotten involved with Elon Musk, he went to law school, like a lot of his friends, because that was supposedly the gateway to middle-class life and the 9 to 5 and a little decent income so you could buy a house, get married, have a car, etc. When in actuality, that was the riskiest thing that he could have done. In fact, the only thing it guaranteed is debt, and I would argue that's the same thing it guarantees debt. It doesn't guarantee a job. The least risky thing for Peter Thiel to do at the time was to start a company called PayPal, was to go to Silicon Valley, drop out of college like people like Elon Musk did, or for the Zuckerbergs to start Facebook, even though I know they have connections with Central Intelligence, allegedly, etc. That was actually the least risky. In fact, when I was starting AMTV, that was the least risky thing that I could do. But everyone around me saw it as the riskiest thing. So what are you doing? Why are you leaving finance? Why are you leaving a high, paying job? Why are you, leaving such a, large company with, comfort and security and all this kinds of stuff after being personally educated at the finest private and public schools? Because I could see this shift. I could see the eradication and finance, what makes up the monolithic institutions of New York City today, which are dying. The media, which is dying. It's not even an argument anymore. CNN is dying. MSNBC is dying. Fox is dying. The media wave has been the far biggest trend of the last 5 to 10 years. In fact, it was so big that most people couldn't even see it. I remember when I started AMTV, people literally told me I couldn't do it. They said that I couldn't do it. Not that I couldn't put myself on camera, but that you can't say things like that. You can't put yourself on camera. You can't criticize the establishment. You can't, point a finger at Ben Bernanke or Alan Greenspan or Janet Yellen or, criticize the modern system as it was. And this isn't news, they would say. It's like entertainment news. Well, what does it become? Our society has become exactly what we originally started here at AMTV. The media business is now all entertainment based. Even Trump's campaign is one big PR content generation system. In fact, I should probably consult them and consult others on content and content generation and how this is the new world. It's not the traditional model, the 30, 60-second commercial that drove television or drove network sales from years past. It's totally different. People like Trump are hijacking the political system. People like us, like you, are hijacking the media system. At the same time, there's this dramatic structural shift, and there's all these great changes coming. I think that these disruptions will be severe. I think will be a byproduct of war. I think the great war, the next great war, has already begun. The economic war has begun. The political war has begun. But most importantly, how it should affect all of us and how we should look at it is how does it affect our individual lives, our livelihood, our family, our friends. And again, the message should be you need to determine the outcome. You need your skill set as the most valuable asset that you have. It's not money in the bank. It's having a real skill. Let me give you an example. My skill is creating content. My skill is putting myself out to the world and sharing ideas and challenging people. That's my skill. It's irreplaceable. I have a unique personality, and it's something you can't replace with a robot. Maybe you could, but it's probably not likely. So the question that I would ask yourself is, what skill do you possess that's totally and utterly unique, that will always be desired in this new paradigm, in this new world, at a time of deteriorating structural unemployment and the socialization of our societies, and this fragmentation and redistribution of wealth? If you don't have that skill, start building the skill right away. If you have the skill, never be satisfied. I'm never satisfied. Continue to build the skill. You've noticed that I've probably gotten tremendously better in presenting a video or an idea than I did, 2,000 videos ago when I was sitting in a bedroom and I had a dog walking by me. I mean, it's gotten so much better through practice. And so you need to put these tools and these ideas into your practice today. You need to attract positive things into your life, attract the right people and energy and success, and you need to move forward right away. And so think in your life today how you're moving against the grain. And if you're not, think about how you can begin to move against the grain and increase your own skill set into something that is practically needed, that can't be replaced, and that would be viewed as an asset even in a robotic, algorithmic, social media, tech giant, monopolistic, new world order society of global integration. And again, disruption after disruption, chaos and fragmentation after chaos and wealth transfer, all of this a part of this engineered plot to destroy the constitutional republic, the system, sovereign nations, borders, all of this a part of the long-term trajectory and strategy of the New World elites, New World Order elites to dominate, utterly control, and merge themselves with big tech and technology and embark on an entire new generation and species, arguably, of man. This is what's here, folks. It's not what's coming. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Put your comment, question in the box below. Get this video out everywhere. Make it viral. Hard-hitting it in your face. I'm Christopher Green. You've been tuning into AMTV. Peace.
Christopher Green, AMTV on YouTube. Go check him out. Subscribe. Now, I've said my take on it that, I think that there is a engineered collapse to induce a more authoritarian, centralized control, and they'll do it through trade deals. They'll do it through, treaties, but they won't call them treaties. And they'll do it through things with NATO and the United Nations. And they're already doing it. They've been doing it, but I think we're we're going to see a new level of this happening. And I'm a little kind of worried about it because we know that they are continuing to try to come after Second Amendment rights through the United Nations. We have a very good possibility that things could be passed while we're watching this whole circus that's going on, and we're calling it an election. I think I actually seen one. Give me a second here. Let me see if I can pull it up. So we don't freeze computer up here. Okay, give me a second. I'm trying to find it here on reason.com, I think is where I've seen it, so. Okay. We have, everybody's by now has heard about the Katie Couric thing, but I'm not going to cover that because it's just so out there. I want to try to cover things that might not be talked about right now, that should be talked about right now. And one is, I'm not really hearing any bashing of Hillary Clinton and the Second Amendment right now. Kind of interesting. You think that the right would do some more, pieces about the Second Amendment because, well, that's definitely considered more of a right-wing thing. Even though us libertarians would say, no, it's not right-wing, it's just not radical left. But says here, Reason, and it's in our Hit and Run blog piece. It's pretty clear Clinton does not think Americans have a constitutional right to guns. During an interview with ABC's George Stephanopoulos on Sunday, Hillary Clinton reinforced the impression that she does not believe the Second Amendment protects the individual right to arms. Stephanopoulos put the question to her directly, and she dodged it twice. Stephanopoulos, do you believe that an individual's right to bear arms is a constitutional right that is not linked to service in a militia? I think, Clinton, I think that for most of our history, there was a nuanced reading of the Second Amendment until the decision by the late Justice Scalia, and there was no argument until then that localities and states and the federal government had a right, as we do with every amendment, to impose reasonable regulation. So I believe we can have common sense gun safety measures consistent with the Second Amendment, and in fact, what I have proposed is supported by 90% of the American people and more than 75% of responsible gun owners. And that's BS, I'll tell you right now, because there's not common sense. They keep using the term common sense. And we need to commandeer that term, common sense, to describe why regulations on gun control do the opposite of what they claim they will do. But says, so that's is exactly why, or what I think is constitutionally permissible. No, because it's not, because if the Constitution says, oh, you have a right to bear arms, and, you know, all the way up to whatever the federal government will regulate it for. Well, they can regulate you out of every constitutional right if they wanted to. So that's not what's constitutionally permissible. You have to amend the Constitution. Can't regulate around the Constitution. And once again, you have Donald Trump just making outright fabrications, accusing me of something that is absolutely untrue. But I'm going to continue to speak out for the comprehensive background checks, closing the gun show loopholes, closing the online loophole, closing the so-called Charleston loophole, reversing the bill that Senator Sanders voted for, and I voted against, giving immunity from liability to gun makers and sellers. I think all of that can and should be done, and it is, in my view, consistent with the Constitution. And the Stephanopoulos and the Heller decision also does say that there can be some restriction, but that's not what I asked. I said, do you believe their conclusion that an individual right to bear arms is a constitutional right? And Clinton said, if it is constitutional right, then it, like every other constitutional right, is subject to reasonable regulation. And what people have done with that decision is to take it as far as they possibly can and reject what has been our history from the very beginning of the Republic, where some of the earliest laws that were passed were about firearms. So I think it's important to recognize that reasonable people can say, as I do, responsible gun owners have a right. I have no objection to that, but the rest of the American public has a right to require certain kinds of regularly responsible action to protect everyone else. And this is something that you know she never directly answered. The last one started off, if it is a constitutional right, then it, like every other constitutional right, is subject to reasonable regulation. That's not answering it. That's beating around the bush. It says here, Clinton and Stephanopoulos are referring to District of Columbia versus Heller, the 2008 decision in which the Supreme Court recognized that the Second Amendment protects an individual right to armed self-defense. The court ruled that the District of Columbia's firearm restrictions, which banned handguns and required owners of long guns to keep them disassembled or disabled by trigger locks, were inconsistent with that right. Clinton thinks Heller was wrongly decided, which at the very least means that she thinks the district's law was constitutional. As I noted in a column last month, that position is hard to reconcile with a meaningful right to armed self-defense, since the regulation overturned by the court made it impossible to exercise that right. But it seems clear that Clinton also disagrees with the idea that the Second Amendment protects any sort of individual right to guns. No one who accepts that view would answer a question about whether he does by saying if it is a constitutional right. Clinton is implicitly saying that she does not believe people have a constitutional right to firearms, but that even voters who do believe they should still be okay with her gun control proposals. In that light, the few references to the Second Amendment on Clinton's campaign website make more sense 4 out of 11 scold people, NRA leaders, Republican presidential candidates here and potential Supreme Court nominees listed by Donald Trump by reading the Second Amendment. Too broadly, here are the other Second Amendment mentions. Number 1, former U.S. Representative Gabrielle Giffords, who was gravely injured in a Tucson mass shooting 5 years ago, and her husband says Clinton's gun control agenda would help reduce gun violence and save lives, all while respecting the Second Amendment rights of responsible gun owners. And you can read the rest of them there, but I'm not going to go through the rest of this article. But these are the type of people that we might vote for, really. That's not too encouraging. Not encouraging at all, really. I had one last clip I wanted to play. Let me see if I can get to it. Okay, try and get this up here. Okay, I got a clip, and then if I can find this article again, I had an article to go with it too. Okay, yes I do. I have it right here. Okay, I'm gonna play this clip. This is Ben Swan. It's a pretty quick clip, so we'll get through this. And it's a revolving door between FDA and Big Pharma.
Big Pharma. The name alone conjures images of collusion, big money, and major influence. In this series, we're going to take a look at Big Pharma and its powerful influence over media, doctors, and even you. And we're going to give you an unprecedented look at the truth behind the tactics, the strategy, and the revolving door between the FDA and these big pharmaceutical companies that claim to be looking out for your health. The first step toward truth is to be informed. And stay tuned after our episode for an important message on health. Well, it is a stunning accusation. The former commissioner of the FDA accused, along with her husband, of making hundreds of millions of dollars while suppressing information about deadly drugs. The RICO lawsuit was filed April 11, 2016 in the U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C. on behalf of 8 plaintiffs who claimed they suffered severe harm by ingesting the drug Levaquin, whose deadly risks were concealed to protect financial interests. The 2 of them are accused of collusion, conspiracy, and racketeering alongside the pharmaceutical giant Johnson & Johnson to conceal the deadly risks of Levaquin. From the lawsuit, while defendant Hamburg was FDA commissioner, her husband, defendant Brown's annual income, not coincidentally, increased from a reported $10 million in 2008 to an estimated $125 million in 2011, and an estimated $90 million in 2012, due in whole or in part to the defendant's racketeering conspiracy to withhold information about the devastating, life-threatening, and deadly effects of Levaquin. The lawsuit brings to light just one portion of the problem between troubling relationships in the FDA and Big Pharma, though clearly what is alleged here, if true, would be one of the most dramatic examples in history A public citizen petitioned the FDA in 1996 and again in 2006 to issue black box warnings for tendon rupture and tendinitis. Had warnings been issued, the death toll from Levaquin, reputedly more than 5,000 by the way, and the tens of thousands who were debilitated with life-threatening diseases would likely have been averted. And yet Levaquin was a blockbuster drug, and it was heavily prescribed by doctors.
The FDA and many of these organizations that are supposed to oversee these pharmaceutical companies and these drug makers, were they failing in their role to be able to determine whether or not these drugs were dangerous?
Doug Brimner is an author, a doctor, and a professor at Atlanta's Emory University.
When the FDA is looking at a drug, they're essentially determining whether or not that drug is safe based on the information they're being given. But if the drug itself is dangerous after the fact, they're not following up to determine whether or not that's true?
Congress has limited the budget of the FDA over the years, so they've capped the budget so it can't increase, but they've also demanded that they increase the speed with which they approve drugs. So the number of people working on new drug approval has been increasing at the expense of those who are supposed to be watching drugs after they come out on the market.
The FDA is approving drugs, but once they're on the market, there's very little oversight, as in the case with Levaquin. But getting drugs past the FDA, that can also be a case of collusion on a number of levels.
The thing about the FDA is not a full-time, a career job. It's a few years on the FDA, and then they're being courted by the pharmaceutical companies.
Lori Powell is a former brand strategist for a medical education agency which serves the pharmaceutical industry. She says there is a difficult balance here because while the FDA officials are supposed to be watchdogs over pharmaceutical companies, they're also constantly courted by pharmaceutical companies.
You'll have a Merck going in and saying to somebody on the FDA, I'll give you $600,000 if you'll come and work on our regulatory committee to go into bat for us with the FDA. And they'll say, okay, well, I'll think about that. And then there'll be like a Pfizer will come in and say, well, we'll give you $800,000 a year to come in and work on our regulatory committee. And so it becomes like a bidding war like that. So the FDA knows that their next jumping off point to go from a lower paying government job to be a very lucrative pharma job on the inside, the manufacturing side, they know that that's part of their career path. So that, I'm sure, weighs heavily into their decision-making process.
So the question is, should that practice be banned? If you want to work for the FDA, shouldn't that be what you have chosen to do?
Those people that work there should not be allowed to go to work with pharmaceuticals. They should not have any contact with those people. They should realize that their job is serious and it's important. And if they want to work there, that's their career.
And yet fraud between the public and the private sectors happens every day. What you need to know here is that fixing the revolving door between a government agency like the FDA and these massive pharmaceutical companies actually is pretty easy. Shouldn't it simply be illegal to work for an agency like the FDA and then leave that public sector job for a job in the private sector that you once oversaw regulation for? There are some who will say, hey, you can't do that. We're a capitalist economy. But allowing regulators to be in positions of power that can be bought off or influenced by their massive companies that they're supposed to oversee, well, folks, that's not capitalism. It's cronyism. And the only people who likely believe that it's acceptable are those who stand to profit from it.
Ben Swan, Truth and Media, Ben Swan on YouTube. Check him out. truthandmedia.com. Now, there was one that article that went across UCY's Facebook feed. I'm not sure who posted it, but it was coming out naturalblaze.com. And this one was titled, Who Runs Washington? The Long Reach of Big Pharma. And it kind of talks about some of what, he talked about. But right here, like a mythical sea monster, the true nature of Wall Street, London, centered global corporatocracy is often talked about, but rarely seen. However, on rare occasions, a tentacle breaks the surface and affords the public an opportunity to examine and assess its true gargantuan dimensions. Just such a moment occurred when leaked diplomatic letters from the Colombian embassy in Washington, D.C. revealed just how far the United States government is willing to go on behalf of the corporate financier interests that clearly shape the entirety of its foreign policy. The Intercept would report in its article, "Leaks show Senate aide threatened Colombia over cheap cancer drug." That leaked diplomatic letters sent from Colombia's embassy in Washington described how a staffer with the Senate Finance Committee, which is led by Senator Orrin Hatch, Republican from Utah, warned of repercussions if Colombia moves forward on approving the cheaper generic form of a cancer drug. The drug is called imatinib or Gleevec. Its manufacturer, Novartis, markets the drug in Colombia as Gleevec. The World Health Organization's list of essential medicines last year suggested it as treatment not only for chronic myeloid leukemia, but also gastrointestinal tumors. Excuse me. Currently, the cost of an annual supply is over $15,000, or about 2 times the average Colombian's income. The repercussions included threats to derail $450 million Peace Colombia initiative aimed at ending decades of fighting in the South American nation that has claimed nearly 250,000 lives, leveraging peace and stability in Colombia to force Bogota to capitulate to pharmaceutical giants like Novartis seems extreme, but upon closer examination of other episodes in recent history, including the U.S. invasion and occupation of Iraq, the subversion of Libya and Syria, and admitted U.S. ambitions to encircle and contain China, such coercion is a common feature of the Wall Street London-centric international order Washington eagerly promotes. What is perhaps most appalling about this most recent episode is that Novartis patent is for a drug developed using public funding over several decades through the United States National Institute of Health. Indeed, in 1990, the NIH-funded research Dr. Brian Drucker began developing model systems integral to bringing Gleevec to market. He would eventually partner directly with Ciba Geigy, now Novartis, before clinical trials began. The NIH's own report, Fighting Cancer, ushering in a new era of molecular medicine, would profoundly admit the NIH National Cancer Institute, along with many other public and private organizations, played a vital role in developing Gleevec. The nature of pharmaceutical giants building fortunes upon publicly funded research, with Gleevec serving as primary example, was even the subject of an entire paper published by the National Science Foundation under the article "Public R&D Investments in Private Sector Patenting Evidence from NIH Funding Rules." Who runs Washington? If corporate financier interests would jeopardize the peace and stability of an entire nation to maintain a monopoly over a single pharmaceutical developed not even by them, but publicly funded research, what would these same sort of corporate financier interests do if the stakes were infinitely higher, say as high as pushing through a region-wide trade deal that would give such interest monopolies not over a single chemical compound but over entire industries? It's clear that elected representatives in Washington, London, and across the rest of the European Union do not represent the interests of those who elected them. Instead, they are clearly subject to and instruments of corporate financier special interests, not just from across the pharmaceutical industry, but from a variety of industries ranging from finance and banking to big oil, big ag, and big defense. And you can read the rest of this article, naturalblaze.com, and it's who runs Washington, the long reach of Big Pharma. But, you know, as in that truth, the media also shows that it's not even the elected officials. It goes down to people that just work in these sectors of government. Well, you know, you will be courted by one of these industries if you help get things passed for them. And it's really interesting when, you know, the elected officials won't even do what the people that elected them would like them to do type argument. And I go, these people don't elect them though. That's the greatest fallacy that is constantly put out there, and people buy into it. We have so much of the population that is either Republican or Democrat, and then we have, you know, our offshoot of the 2/3 party parties that are out there that get the most, which would be one, the Libertarian Party, and two, the Green Party gets a little bit too. They don't do too bad. But with this whole, you know, party system that they have, you know, whatever candidate they put out there, the people that side with one side or the other will always vote for their candidate. The loyal people, you know, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat. They will vote for whatever candidate is put out there. Then you have the ones that either they're inspired to vote or they just don't vote. And then the third party people. The problem with a lot of all of this is, guess what? You're not voting. You're not electing them. You are going along with who those elitists want to run. Basically, it's like you got puppet masters up there going, we want that person and that person in the ring fighting each other. And we're going to let all of you people bet on them. Put your money there. Put your, you know, team sports type deal going on. You know, wear their shirts, buy their hats, put your money into the game. And the house will always win. They get to watch a good fight. And then the winner ends up doing what the puppet masters want. And it's the greatest fallacy that is continuing on and on and on, when, even if you're looking at Bernie Sanders, you're still being manipulated. And you're being manipulated to Bernie's advantage, because he doesn't plan on winning. He doesn't think he's going to get the nomination. I don't think he ever did. But what he does is, well, you follow him. Guess what? You just gave him leverage in the Democratic Party to get some stuff he wants to do or get positions that he wants. He will support Hillary Clinton and turn his followers to Hillary Clinton the moment they make a good deal with them. Because he'll do something as he'll threaten that he'll support third party, maybe Jill Stein or someone. And they will eventually go, well, we'll give you this position if you'll put your supporters towards Clinton. Not all of them will go. Some of them won't vote. Some of them will go third party, but you'll probably get 60 to 75% of them that will go ahead and support Hillary. You're leverage for him. That's what I think he planned from the beginning. He's seen a chance. He's seen the ability to get this following, and he's going to use it. See, Ron Paul probably could have done the same thing, but he didn't. I think Bernie will. It's still to be seen, but I have a feeling that Bernie will. Now, let me bring something up. Let me bring this up on a new browser here. Other one's getting slow. Sometimes my browser is going nuts. And of course, my Skype likes to try to have its add-on popping up. Okay. I've seen this article on the economiccollapseblog.com. Now, one thing that we followed on this broadcast is the economy pretty closely. And one of the things about that is trends that tend to happen right before a bubble pops, right before the start of a recession. And I just seen this that came out of the economic collapse blog. Something big that always happens right before the official start of a recession has just happened. And it says here, what you're about to see is a major confirmation that a new economic downturn has already begun. Last Friday, the government released the worst jobs report in 6 years, and that has a lot of people really freaked out. But when you really start digging into those numbers, you quickly find that things are even worse than most analyses are suggesting. In particular, the number of temporary jobs in the United States has started to decline significantly after peaking last December. Why is this so important? Is because the number of temporary jobs started to decline precipitously right before the last two recessions as well. You see the economic conditions start to change. Temporary workers are often affected before anyone else. Temporary workers are easier to hire than other types of workers, and they are also easier to fire. In this chart, you can see the number of temporary workers peaked and started to decline rapidly before we even got to the recession of 2001. And you will notice that the number of temporary workers also peaked and started to decline rapidly before we even got to the recession of 2008. This shows why the temporary workforce is considered to be a leading indicator for the U.S. economy as a whole. When the number of temporary workers peaks and then starts to fall steadily, there is a major red flag, and that is why it is so incredibly alarming that the number of temporary workers peaked in December 2015 and has fallen quite a bit since then. In May, the U.S. economy lost another 21,000 temporary jobs, and overall we have lost almost 64,000 since December. If a new economic downturn had already started, this is precisely what we would expect to see. The following is some commentary from Wolf Richard. Staffing agencies are cutting back because companies no longer need that many workers. Total business sales in the U.S. have been declining since mid-2014. Productivity has been crummy and getting worse. Earnings are down for the fourth quarter in a row. Companies see that demand for their products is faltering, so the expense cutting has started. The first to go are the hapless temporary workers. Another indicator which is pointing to big trouble for American workers is the Federal Labor Market Conditions Index. Just check out this chart from Zero Hedge, which shows that the index has now been falling on a month-over-month basis for 5 months in a row. Not since the last recession have we seen that happen. Of course, I've been warning about this new economic downturn since the middle of last year. U.S. factory orders have now been falling for 18 months in a row. Job cut announcements at major companies are running 24% higher up to this point in 2016 than they were doing the same time period in 2015. And just recently, Microsoft said that they were going to be cutting 1,850 jobs as the market for smartphones continues to slow down. As I have been warning for months, the exact same patterns that we witnessed just prior to the last major economic crisis are playing out once again right in front of our eyes. Perhaps you have blind faith in Barack Obama, the Federal Reserve, and our other leaders, and perhaps you are convinced that everything will turn out okay somehow. But there are others that are doing what they can to get prepared in advance. It may surprise you to learn that George Soros is one of them. According to recent media reports, George Soros has been selling all investments like crazy and has poured tremendous amounts of money into gold and gold stocks. Maybe the best argument in favor of gold is the American legendary investor and billionaire George Soros has recently sold 37% of his stock and bought a lot more gold and gold stocks. George Soros, who once called gold the ultimate bubble, has resumed buying the precious metal after a 3-year hiatus. On Monday, the billionaire investor disclosed that in the first quarter, he bought 105 million shares in SPDR Gold Trust, the world's largest gold exchange traded fund, valued at about $123.5 million. Fortune and Reuters reported Tuesday George Soros didn't make his fortune by being a dummy. Obviously, he can see that something big is coming, and so he's making the moves that he feels are appropriate. If you are waiting for some type of big announcement from the government that a recession has started, you are likely going to be waiting for quite a while. How it usually works is that we are not told that we are in a recession until one has already been happening for an extended period of time. For instance, back in 2008, Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke insisted that the U.S. economy was not heading into a recession, even though we found out later that we were already in one at the moment. Bernanke made that now infamous statement. On my website, I have been documenting all the red flags that are screaming that a new recession is here for months. You can be like Ben Bernanke in 2008 and stick your head in the sand and pretend that nothing is happening, or you can honestly assess the situation at hand and adjust your strategies accordingly, like George Soros is doing. Of course, I am not a fan of Soros at all. The shady things that he has done to promote the radical left around the globe are well documented, but they don't call people like him the smart money for no reason. Down in Venezuela, the economic collapse has already gotten so bad that the people are hunting dogs and cats for food. Most of the rest of the world, things are not nearly that bad. And they won't be that bad for a while yet, but without a doubt, the global economy is moving in a very negative direction, and the pace of change is accelerating. Those that are wise have already been getting prepared, and those that are convinced that everything is going to be just fine somehow have not been getting prepared. In the end, most people end up believing exactly what they want to believe, and we are not too far away from the time when those choices are going to have very serious consequences. And again, that was out of the economiccollapseblog.com. Now, you know, we've been talking about this, and, you know, I always push people to make investments in different things. And it's one of those things that, you know, I understand people, oh, gold might not be the, oh, Bitcoin might not be the, oh, I don't like guns, or why would I want to buy a whole bunch of seed? Listen, you have to be diverse. Do a little bit of everything. You can't afford gold, buy silver, which you can get grams of gold for like $50 or $40, something like that right now. But it's one of those things that definitely where we're headed. If you're relying on your dollar bill, your check every week, and your bank, I think you're going to be disappointed. And I don't see 401ks headed in a positive direction. I think you have to be diverse in the situation we're sitting in right now. And I had another one here. And this was out of RT. And this really should sum up that, you know, when that article was talking about from the economiccollapseblog.com, it's their top article right now, the one I just went over. But it talked about Soros. People go, you know, how are these people, you know, becoming so rich? Well, it's because they have a hand in the economy. They have a hand in policy. And watch what they do with their money. You know a recession's getting ready to happen when you see the most wealthiest people start getting rid of one asset and buying up another asset. They're planning. They're going, hey, we're already in recession. I buy a whole bunch of this, And once people catch on, then, I have my wealth back. I don't lose anything. This is how they keep their wealth and make a little bit on it. But it's this article here from RT. It's 1% of the world population owns almost half of its wealth. And it says here, a report has shown tax havens became even more popular in 2015. Another report shows the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Boston Consulting Group says only 1% of the population can call themselves millionaires or richer, and the share of their wealth is growing. About 18.5 million households have net assets of at least $1 million, totaling $78.8 trillion, which is near the global annual income output or economic output. Boston Consulting said it in its Global Wealth 2016 report. That also amounts to 47% of the global wealth. Financial assets, bond shares, cash, and deposits, excluding property. Overall global wealth grew by 5.2% to $168 trillion. In 2013, the share of the wealthy 1% was estimated at 45%, and the increase is fueling concerns. Global inequality is growing. The biggest number of millionaires was recorded in the United States, about 8 million, followed by China with about 2 million, and Japan with 1 million. The richest countries per capita are Switzerland and Liechtenstein due to their favorable tax regimes. The report has shown that tax havens became even more popular in 2015, with demand growing 3% to close to 10 trillion. However, developed countries have become less enthusiastic about them, as offshore wealth held by investors in North America, Western Europe, and Japan declined by 3% in 2015, this study says. And we see that they will also flee countries. They'll take their operations and they'll just sell product. And we know that there's been, companies that have moved to China, moved their operations, moved their headquarters. The families moved. I'm sure a lot of them are part of the people that have given up their U.S. citizenship. And we have a situation where you better make moves now before you start seeing Fox News, CNN, ABC, all the big mainstream people start talking about the new recession. Because if they're talking about it on there, it's already too late. If you wait for it to pop up on your TV on mainstream media, it's too late. We're already in it. When they finally tell you that boots are on the ground in a country, it's after we've already been there for months. They are controlled media. They tell you stuff when it's finally appropriate according to them to tell you, or according to their masters. Don't forget to check out all of those sources and support them, or at least the journalism that many of them do. Again, go to Ron Paul Liberty Report, AMTV, check them all out, subscribe on YouTube. When we talk about media, we forget that, we are in a new era that has allowed us to bring you information that before it wouldn't was spread like wildfire like it has, where we have been able to stop legislation, where we have been able to slow down certain things. It has made a real conundrum for the establishment to try to push things where they're trying to adapt to what we already have in a way kind of mastered. And it's alternative media like UCY.TV, which gives me and other hosts here this platform to be able to bring you this information, to be able to warn you of, this recession that we're headed into right now. And it's really important that you support alternative media. Maybe UCY you're just coming to, maybe you have other, alternative media, but it's very important. And UCY, if you go to UCY.TV, they do have a support tab at the top, and you can donate and help support, UCY.TV we can have this platform to spread information. But they also have set up a affiliate link with Amazon. UCY.TV is partnered with Amazon, and they bring you the same great deals, same great shipping. And if you scroll down towards the bottom of UCY.TV, you'll see that Amazon button. Click it, and it'll take you there. Great deals, great prepping gear, things that you might need for any type of emergency, natural disaster, what it be. Go to that, and when you buy a product off of Amazon, UCY gets a kickback. No price increase for you. It just gives UCY a little bit of a kickback off of that to help cover the operating cost here. UCY has really been self-funded for a long time, and the small donations, the small purchases help all that much more to keep this network on the air. So definitely go there. And at the same time, I tell people, I think these partnerships with things like Amazon are perfect because, it allows you to get things that you need at the same cost and also support alternative media. And like I was telling you with this whole economic news and George Soros buying gold, it's something that I have been, telling people that I think is a wise investment, and not your only investment you should be making, but one of the many that you should at least look into and see if gold is the right thing for you, gold or silver. And Amagi Metals is my choice where I go, and that's why I partnered with them. And if you go to antityrannynews.com/metal, it will take you to Amagi Metals and check out the great deals they got. You can even buy grams of gold like I was talking about, and you can buy silver in small amounts too. Go there, check them out. Really great deals. And again, just like the Amazon link, no price increase for you, but if you go through that link, antityrannynews.com/metal, it will give antityrannynews.com a kickback to help, cover the cost of the website and all of this. So go check them out. Again, UCY.TV, scroll down to the bottom, click the Amazon tab, and antityrannynews.com/metal. And, all the support is very, very well received, and we appreciate everybody out there.